you're about to unleash the biggest inflationary policy in the last 100 years with tariffs. And then you're telling Powell that you should cut rates. We're talking bizarro world, right?
Is Donald Trump backing down in his standoff with China and with the high priests of American finance? Well, the president's relentless attacks on Jerome Powell, the boss of the US central bank, sent the dollar plummeting and undermined a lot of investor confidence. Despite calling Powell a major loser, Trump says he won't try to fire him. And the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the US may be minded to slash tariffs on those imports from China. Well, Dan Ives is an analyst and the managing director at Wedbush Securities, and he joins me now. Welcome, Dan, to the show. Tell me, how important is this Trump rowback on Jerome Powell?
Look, this is all now the start of walking back from the edge of the cliff, because you can bully the bond market, you can bully the dollar. And the markets, the sell America trade has been on. And I think they finally have recognized that in this Twilight Zone's 3 weeks. And I think this is just the first start of Trump having to take steps back from tariffs, from Powell, and I think the market's spoken, and they need to listen.
Why has he been clashing so much with the central bank and with Powell? Interest rates are really at the heart of it all, aren't they?
Well, you're about to unleash the biggest inflationary policy in the last 100 years with tariffs. And then you're telling Powell that you should cut rates. We're talking bizarro world, right? And I think that's the whole issue, is that Powell, whether you love him or hate him, he's engineered a soft landing. You need independence of the Fed. And I think as Trump crossed that line, that was almost viewed as like a black swanish type event, okay, at least in terms of the overall nervousness. You cannot keep doing this to the market. Market spoke. You can't bully the bond or stock market or dollar. And I think that's why you're seeing Trump back off on Powell, back off on tariffs. Musk is backing off in terms of, what I believe is his step away from the White House. I think, we're seeing clear changes here.
Well, you say we're starting to see Trump back off and start to sort of turn the ship and move direction. But clearly some damage has been done. How long do you think that disruption is going to last for in terms of the markets and the dollar?
Look, I could argue he might have already thrown the U.S. into a recession, right? Just given the uncertainty in what we're seeing. Because look at the ships that are coming out of Singapore. You have 30% of ships that have almost turned around. You talk about the uncertainty, it's like a Jenga puzzle, right? You remove one thing, what happens? And I think that's the whole, once you create the avalanche, you can't just say, okay, it's over, stop it. And that's been what every tech leader has talked about, from Jensen and NVIDIA, right? In terms of to Cook at Apple, to obviously, all the other CEOs that he's spoken with. And it's unanimous. And I think that message has finally gotten through to Trump, probably through Besant. And I think as he continues to be the one I think most credible from a street perspective.
All of this disruption is clearly being very clearly felt in the States. But what are the wider implications for what Trump has done to the global economy, do you think?
It's a shock event in terms of the ripple effect, in terms of prices, global trade, uncertainty. When you start to go 3-4 degrees of separation, a small business in Asia could ultimately impact another business in Africa, which affects a company in the US, which affects a company in the UK. It goes back to that's the nature of a global world, the global supply chain. They're trying to go back to the 1950s. There's no economist in the world that would agree with this. And that's why we've always said it was going to be the worst policy decision in 100 years at the White House.
So can I ask, Dan, so much of Wall Street seemed to be behind Donald Trump in the run-up to his re-election. And there was a pretty infamous quote after he was elected. There was a top banker who told the Financial Times here they felt liberated because we can say, and then a couple of slurs, without getting cancelled, it's a new dawn for us. So, I mean, how do you think all these people on Wall Street are feeling now, seeing what's happened to the markets and the dollar? How did they get it all wrong? It's what I'm fascinated by.
I mean, look, it all started on Liberation Day or whatever you want to. I mean, that chart, which will be, I mean, that'll be a chart looked at for decades and decades to come, which is a trade deficit converted into a tariff chart in some odd formula that no one will ever understand. And I think that's what set it off, is that the reality is everyone knew reciprocal tariffs were going to happen. But you can't burn the house down to meet the firefighters. That's essentially what he did.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, that's what he did. And he set in motion something where all of a sudden, over the last few days, they've recognized, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have pressed that button.
I want to just ask you quickly about China. I mean, you mentioned China tariffs, and Besant has sort of been suggesting that really Trump's got to back down on them. Do you think Trump will? And if he does, how surprising will that U-turn be? And will he just sort of reframe it in the way he's done, saying, oh, this was always my plan, but look what I've achieved and look what we've got out of it?
Again, like how he's going to posture it, and that's, who knows there. But China, they don't have midterm elections. And China looks at things over 100 years, not 1 year. And guess what? The U.S., where the raw materials come from? China.
Yeah.
Where are we buying things from? China. Are you making iPhones in the U.S.? If you want iPhones for $3,500, we should make them in New Jersey. If you like them for $1,000, you make them in China.
Let's turn to Tesla now. So we've had some results out from Tesla in the last 24 hours, and that has prompted quite an admission from Elon Musk. So how bad was yesterday for Tesla? What did we learn?
I mean, the quarter, it was like the Michael Jackson Thriller video.
that bad? That gory?
Yeah, that bad.
Wow.
I mean, that bad. So the reality is like, that's another one. Clock struck midnight. Musk recognized what the brand damage is. You can't deny it. He had to take a step back, and I believe it's the beginning of the end. I think it's essentially him leaving the White House.
Do you really think so? Do you think that's the end of Doge, or the beginning of the end?
Mm-hmm.
Do you?
I mean, Doge could still maybe be there, but this is basically Musk. I mean, this is the off ramp for him. That he's essentially leaving the White House.
I mean, does that just tell us what we already knew, that at the end of the day he's going to put his bottom line before what he thinks is best for America?
But it's not even about bottom line. You're talking about, as a CEO, you have a fiduciary responsibility. Two, you have one of the best technology companies in the world, and basically the brand damage globally has been something that no one in a nightmare would have ever thought about it, that it would get this bad. And I think Musk recognized that, gladly not maybe too late. And look, you could talk about Doge and country over company and everything, but, Musk, when it comes to Tesla shareholders, the stock and the results speak for itself, and he needed to make a pivot. That's why it was a moment of truth for Musk.
Who's going to be particularly pleased in the White House that we might be seeing the back of him in terms of wafting around the Oval Office? I mean, will it be the people around Trump who feel he's got too much influence? Will the Democrats be delighted? Who's going to be best pleased to see the back of him?
Look, I mean, we got to see how that all plays out. But the reality is like the individual in that whole White House that had the best understanding of how the supply chain businesses work, China, it's Musk, right? In other words, like when you talk about bureaucrats that have lived their whole life within the 202 area code, they don't know how businesses work. So Musk leaving, I mean, it definitely, there's a hole there, right? I mean, others will try to obviously take advantage, but the reality is Musk went down the Trump White House path, Doge, and got everything bad with it and nothing good.
Do you think the damage, I mean, we saw some pretty shocking numbers yesterday, 70% and 20% down in terms of profits and that on Tesla. Do you think, and obviously this is a consumer-led company, do you think the damage of Elon Musk associating himself with Trump to that extent, is that going to be permanent for the Tesla brand, do you think?
I think there's about 10% of it at least that's permanent. So maybe like if one of every 10 customers that was going to buy a Tesla now doesn't, just because the last thing you ever want is to become a political symbol, and that's what Tesla become. Tesla became a political symbol for Musk, but of course it's for Trump, it's for Doge, and especially in Europe, we've seen massive sell-offs there, in terms of relative to you know customers choosing other cars instead of Tesla. And I think it's 10% brand damage. But look, you had to make a stance, and this was the time. You had to make a pivot now for the future of Tesla. That's a must do.
Dan, can I just ask you a question about the hole there seems to be in the Democrats' comeback? Would all of this look quite different if actually there was an eloquent, thoughtful
Yes.
and firm Democrat who was standing up to say, this could be an alternative, this is what's going wrong?
Oh, I mean, no doubt. I mean, that's been the whole issue, right? Like business focused, middle ground, something that business leaders, Wall Street had could back. But that's been the vacuum there.
Yeah, but
So
why?
it comes down to like, how do you find yourself in this situation? And that's part of it, right? Like, in other words, it's been a shock to the market, and no one knows the rules of the game.
But I suppose what's hard to understand, looking across the pond, is why America can't find that voice, because there just must be Democrats who can embrace liberal thought, the free market, have a challenging view about central government and overspend. All of those things don't seem to be particularly complicated positions to hold.
Yeah, but look, I mean, it's right now. It's really about confidence that investors have, right? So, in other words, in terms of what happens with whether it's Democrat or Republican, I mean, the reality comes down to the economy, and the last thing you want to see, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, you don't want to see a recession. You don't want to see stagflation, and that's right now what we're staring at, and that's why Trump needed to make the pivot this week to take a step off the cliff.
Well, Dan Ives, analyst at Wedbush Securities, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us up to speed with the chaos that Donald Trump is creating.